In this video, we're going to learn how to create game objects and move them around, as well as navigate the Unity interface. So as we saw in the last video, we can create various things by heading up here and clicking on this create button. We can make lights, 2D and 3D objects, effects, and lots more. For example, I'll create a 3D cube, and indeed you'll see something pop up inside of the scene view. And of course, it's also listed in the hierarchy. Now this cube doesn't look very 3D, it looks like a simple 2D square, and the reason is we currently have our scene window set to 2D. If I click this little button, my scene will switch to 3D, and ta-da! My cube does indeed look three-dimensional. So to zoom in and out in the scene view, simply scroll your mouse's middle button. To pan the scene like this, hold down the Alt key on your keyboard as well as the middle mouse button, and move your mouse around. And finally, to rotate around your scene, hold down the Alt key again, but this time hold down the left mouse button as well. And that's all you need to know to navigate around the Unity scene. Now of course, navigating around the scene takes practice, and chances are high you'll struggle a bit at first to move yourself around objects and so on, but like with everything, just keep at it and you'll improve really quickly. Now notice that rotating yourself around the scene like this is something you'll usually only do when making a 3D game. For 2D, you'll only be zooming in and out, and panning your camera. And when working in 2D, you won't normally be using 3D objects like this cube, so I'm going to delete it from my scene. To do so, I first need to select the cube. You can select an object either by left-clicking on its name in the hierarchy, or left-clicking on it directly inside of the scene view. And then to delete it, just hit the delete key on your keyboard. With that done, let's make a 2D object. So I'll head over to Create, 2D Object, Sprite. And at first, it seems as if nothing has appeared on screen. However, we do see in the hierarchy that a new sprite has been created. So I'll select it in the hierarchy, and in the inspector, I'll take a closer look at the sprite render components. Now of course, we'll take a more detailed look at what components are all about in a future video. For now, just focus on this sprite setting, which is for now empty. What we can now do is drag and drop any image we like inside of this empty slot, and that image will show up in the scene. You'll see if I click on this little circle icon that I can choose from these basic images which come with Unity. For example, I can select this white circle, and now I have a white circle in the scene view. Of course, I can search for some cooler looking image on internet, such as a dragon, and save that image inside of my Unity project. And once it's inside my project window, I can hold down the left mouse button on it and drag it inside the empty slot. And now my new sprite displays a cool dragon. Or of course, you can create your very own sprites inside of Photoshop or GIMP, export those in your Unity project and use that instead. We will of course take a more detailed look at how to create your own sprites later on in this course. Anyway, now that we have a 2D game object in our scene, let's learn how to move it around the scene. There are three main manipulation tools in Unity: the Move tool, Rotate tool, and Scale tool. So selecting my sprite, let's try and move it. I can do so by grabbing my Move tool, which is just up here, and you'll see this arrow gizmo appear. Holding down the left mouse button on this arrow here, for example, and then dragging, you'll see that I'm capable of moving my object to the right or left. I can also select this arrow and move it up or down, or select the center of the Move tool to be able to move up, down, left or right all at once. Note that when working in 3D, you have access to a third arrow that lets you move your object in a whole new direction. Anyway, now it's time for some simple game dev vocabulary. Moving your objects left or right also means that you're moving them along the x-axis. If you take a look at the inspector with your object selected, and more precisely this x position value, you'll see that it changes when you move your object left or right with the Move tool. So note that you can also move your object left or right by typing out a value in this X position box. If I typed in -1 for example, that would move my object slightly to the left. And if I typed in 1, it would move it a bit to the right. And moving your objects up or down means you're moving them along the y-axis. And of course, you can also move your object up or down using this box right here. And the Z value is mostly only used for 3D. You'll usually leave this at 0 when working on 2D games. So basically, these three values indicate the exact position of your object in the scene. So this object currently has a position of 1 on the X, 1.05 on the Y, and 0 on the Z. You'll be using a lot of these X and Y values during your game creation journey to move objects, be that a player character or a bunch of vicious enemies, calculate distances, and lots more. Also keep in mind that by pressing on the little cog icon and choosing reset position down here, you'll set the object back to a position of 0 on all three axes, so X, Y, and Z. Okay, next up we have the rotation tool. You can access this by clicking on this icon here, and you'll see a bunch of circles appearing around our object. Just hold down the left mouse button like you did with the move tool and move your mouse around to rotate your object. Now in 2D, you'll usually just use this circle here to rotate your object along the Z axis. You'll very rarely want to rotate your object along the X or Y axis using the two other circles. Doing so looks a bit odd. And finally we have the scale tool. You can use this to make your object smaller or larger. Again, you can access it by clicking on this icon. It looks a bit like the move tool, except there's little squares instead of triangular arrow-like shapes. If you hold down the left mouse button and drag on the middle square, you'll scale your object uniformly on all three axes. In other words, your object will keep the same proportions. It will just be smaller or bigger. You can of course click on these squares here to squash your object in different directions. And obviously your object will lose its initial proportions by doing so. And that's it. Those are the three manipulation tools. So to recap, you can move, rotate, or scale your objects using the tools up here, or simply by typing out values in the inspector. In between lessons, I really recommend you spend 5 minutes just practicing navigating the scene and manipulating objects. And I'll see you in the next video where we will take a look at components. See you soon.